Parker has bet $15 million on buying 7,500 acres on Dominion Creek, making him one of the biggest claim holders in the Yukon.
What happened?
We got him shut down.
Tony Beets is officially sidelined, and Parker Schnabel didn't pause for even a second. One of mining's biggest power players was abruptly shut down on a critical claim, and in an instant, territory once locked in fierce competition was suddenly up for grabs. Parker recognized the moment immediately. In the Klondike, waiting isn't caution, it's failure. The camp erupted into action. Engines fired, sluice boxes thundered, heavy equipment clawed into the ground. What had been quiet moments earlier turned into full-scale operation mode. Sources close to the site say Beets' shutdown didn't just halt production, it left behind vast sections of untouched, gold-heavy ground. Rich pay dirt that had sat buried and forgotten under Tony's former operation. Parker's team moved fast, cutting straight into high-grade material that hadn't been worked in years. By early afternoon, trucks were already hauling out massive, weight-loaded runs, the kind that make even veteran miners take notice. Across the gold fields, insiders are calling it one of Parker's most ruthless and intelligent moves yet. No drama, no confrontation, just pure strategy. A rival stumbles, and Parker turns the moment into a decisive advantage. And while Parker tightened his grip on the claim, Tony Beets could only watch from the sidelines. Stay tuned and hit subscribe, because this power shift is only just beginning. It all began just before sunrise. Tony's foreman stepped into the pit and stopped cold. The massive dredge, an iron monster that had devoured frozen ground year after year, stood dead still. Its steel frame glinted under the pale northern light, but something was wrong. Bright red government seals were plastered across the machine, operations suspended. The warning stickers snapped in the wind like danger flags. Pumps were shut, hoses severed, fuel tanks drained dry. This wasn't a temporary pause, it was a full-scale shutdown. Within hours, the news rippled through the valley. Crews from neighboring claims gathered on ridgelines, pointing, murmuring, speculating. Some said inspectors had uncovered unauthorized expansion trenches. Others claimed it had nothing to do with environmental violations, that it was political pressure. One rumor spread fast. Tony had ignored a new territorial directive, brushing off officials with his familiar snarl. "You don't tell me where to dig." For decades, Tony Beets had embodied Yukon defiance. A miner who built an empire by playing outside the lines. But this time, the system pushed back. His once deafening claim fell eerily silent. Dredges that had thundered across miles of tundra now sat frozen in place, steam drifting from cooling stacks. Workers huddled around fires, stunned. Tony himself was nowhere in sight. Miles away, inside a warm operations trailer, another miner stared at a breaking headline. Beets' operation suspended indefinitely. Parker Schnabel leaned forward, silent. His crew waited behind him. Seconds passed. Only the hum of heaters and CB radio static filled the room. Then, slowly, Parker smiled. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Everyone there understood exactly what that smile meant. The shutdown dominated every mining forum, radio channel, and social feed across the north. In Dawson bars, old-timers argued over beers. Some said Tony had finally gone too far. Others called it a setup. One miner slammed his glass down and barked, "You think they'd ever do this to Parker? No chance. Tony scared the wrong people." The official explanation cited hydraulic overreach and failure to meet reclamation requirements, but a leaked internal memo told a more complicated story. noise complaints, altered creek flow, possible heritage site disturbances, and at the bottom, one classified line referencing third-party submissions. Someone else had tipped the scales. When reporters finally caught Tony outside the gates, his anger exploded. He tore off his hard hat as snow whipped through his beard. "They call me reckless? I've been mining longer than half those desk jockeys have been alive," he shouted. "You want pollution? Look at what the government's dumped for a century. They're coming after me because I don't bow." The clip went viral instantly. To some, Tony was a legend, fighting the system. To others, a dangerous outlaw who finally crossed the line. While debates raged online, Parker was alone in his office. Lights low, maps spread wide, no rants, no interviews, just planning. Satellite overlays glowed on his laptop, drainage lines, claim grids, lease boundaries. A bold red outline traced Beets Creek, the very channel Tony once swore would crown him king of the North. Now that crown was hanging loose. Near midnight, Parker called in his top foreman. "If Tony's out," he said evenly, "that ground's open. Someone's going to run it. Might as well be us." Silence filled the room. Then Parker rolled out a fresh topographic map. Fuel routes marked, wash plant logistics plotted, access roads color-coded. He wasn't reacting. He'd been preparing. They ran the numbers through the night. Time to relocate equipment, crew requirements, restart timelines. Every calculation pointed to the same answer. It was doable. Fast. By 3 a.m., 2 scouts were already driving north in unmarked trucks. Officially, they were environmental surveyors. In reality, they were mapping entry points, access roads, and claim boundaries. At dawn, Parker's assistant placed a folder on his desk, a fully drafted acquisition proposal. Parker took a sip of coffee and nodded. Send it. Somewhere else, Tony Beets was still fighting through phone calls and paperwork, demanding hearings and appeals. But bureaucracy moves slow, and Parker never waits. Because in the Klondike, opportunity doesn't come back around. Snow drifted across the silent yard like ash. The once loudest operation in the Yukon now stood frozen. Steel machines, chained and taped off, relics of a fallen empire. Miners stared in silence, breath rising into the cold air. Tony Beets stormed through the yard, boots crunching on ice, his voice echoing off idle excavators. And the gold was already slipping away. He shouted into his phone, bouncing between English, Dutch, and a storm of curses, demanding explanations no one seemed willing to give. "You shut my ground down with zero warning," he snarled. "You call this justice?" The wind tore his words away, but his fury burned hot enough to thaw the ice beneath his boots. Inside the equipment shed, mechanics sat motionless. Generators stood silent. Oil drums were half-emptied and abandoned. Every surface was buried under paperwork. Inspection summaries, environmental violation notices, aerial photos marking illegal discharge zones. Tony grabbed one report, ripped it clean in two, and hurled it to the concrete floor. Production cameras hovered at a cautious distance, capturing what looked less like a shutdown and more like the collapse of a dynasty. Then Tony lashed out, kicking a frozen hydraulic line with brutal force. It snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the yard like a rifle shot. He spun toward the camera, eyes burning. "They want a spectacle," he roared. "I'll give them one." At that exact moment, the stillness across the valley shattered. Engines thundered to life. Bright yellow trucks cut through the white landscape. Parker's convoy. Heavy equipment rolled in tight formation, carving fresh tracks straight toward Beets Creek. The sight hit Tony's crew hard. This wasn't just a shutdown. It was a replacement. No one expected Parker to move this fast. Within hours of the ban, his legal team had filed ownership documents under a freshly created shell company, Klondike North Ventures. On paper, it looked independent. In reality, it was Parker's precision tool, designed to claim everything Tony could no longer protect. The filings were flawless, clean language, no loopholes. Fast-tracked approvals through channels Parker's team had quietly prepared long before the shutdown ever happened. They hadn't reacted. They'd anticipated. While Tony's machines sat frozen, Parker's operation exploded to life just miles east. He had already secured the surrounding satellite leases, small, overlooked parcels Tony relied on for access roads and runoff channels. It was a surgical strike. By controlling the perimeter, Parker boxed Beets in completely. Haul roads widened overnight. Power lines stretched deeper into the valley. Inside a mobile command trailer, Parker's logistics team orchestrated the build-up, radios alive with constant updates. Pump line 3 connected. Wash plant en route. North access confirmed. By the second night, floodlights turned the frozen valley into daylight. Tony's silent dredge loomed in darkness, while Parker's machinery roared less than a mile away, beams slicing across the snow. A drone captured the contrast from above, one side locked in icy silence, the other blazing with motion and power. Within 72 hours, the valley no longer echoed with emptiness. Parker's iron filled the void Tony left behind. From a ridge above the site, Monica Beets watched through binoculars, breath trembling in the cold. The glare from Parker's lights reflected off freshly piled gravel. "He didn't hesitate at all," she muttered, lowering the lenses. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't a transition. It was a takeover. Tony, however, wasn't ready to fade quietly. Inside his office trailer, walls were covered in maps, geology overlays, and decades-old claim deeds. He stood over the table, surrounded by family and his most trusted crew. Faces were tight, voices hushed. "If they're looking for a war," Tony growled, jabbing a gloved finger into the map's center, "they'll get one." He started dialing old contacts, names long absent from the valley, drillers, contractors, men who still owed him favors from seasons past. "You still got those pumps?" he asked one. "Those hoses?" A pause. "I might need them." His voice was calm now, but sharpened like steel. Tony shifted his finger to a faded mark on the southern edge of the map, a narrow gulch he'd prospected decades earlier, then abandoned. "No one's watching that stretch," he said quietly. "No inspectors, no cameras. We run it small, no paperwork, off-grid." The room went dead silent. Everyone understood what he was proposing. Words spread quickly among his inner circle. Tony Beets was setting up a shadow operation, unregistered, remote, invisible to regulators. If the authorities erased his name, he'd mine without one. Over the next few nights, trusted crew members vanished from the main camp in pairs and trios, unmarked trucks, fuel barrels with scratched-off labels, headlights slipping into the darkness. Rumors tore through the mining community. "Beets is back. You don't bury a man like that." While whispers spread, Parker's operation kept accelerating. Bulldozers leveled new ground. Conveyor systems stretched across the flats. The first test sluice ran, and out came thick, bright flakes, coarse gold. The very pay streak Tony had once sworn was the richest in the territory. For Parker, it was proof his gamble was already paying off. Then, things started getting strange. One morning, perimeter sensors tripped, motion detected along the southern boundary. The next night, fresh tire tracks appeared on a ridge no company vehicle had accessed. A few days later, during a morning briefing, one of Parker's supervisors froze mid-sentence. A drone hovered overhead, silent, circling the new wash plant. "That's not ours," he shouted. The crew scattered as the drone drifted away into fog. Parker stepped outside, eyes narrowed. He didn't ask who sent it. He already knew. Miles west, at the forest's edge, Tony Beets stood beside his pickup, remote controller in hand. The screen reflected Parker's operation in sharp detail. Excavators, sluice placement, fuel routes. Tony smirked. "Nice setup, kid," he muttered. "Let's see how long it holds." As winter tightened its grip on the Yukon, tension between the camps reached a breaking point. Snow still coated the tailings piles, but online, a wildfire raged. Hashtags like Justice for Beets exploded across platforms. Fans flooded comment sections, furious that the so-called king of the Klondike had been taken down by paperwork. Old clips resurfaced. Tony barking orders, pulling gold from frozen mud like a force of nature. "Say what you want," one viral post read. "Beets built this place from nothing." Others fired back just as hard. Environmental activists celebrated the shutdown, calling it long overdue. Drone footage circulated showing oil-stained ice, leaking ponds, scarred creek beds. For the first time in years, Tony Beets wasn't just a miner, he was the story. At the same time, Parker's image began to split. Some hailed him as a ruthless prodigy who seized opportunity without blinking. Others saw him as a corporate scavenger, feeding on a fallen rival. He didn't wait for controversy to settle. He drove straight through it. One blog summed it up bluntly. "Even Parker's own fans feel uneasy. Taking Beets' legacy ground crosses a line." But Parker believed momentum was survival. In the Yukon, hesitation gets buried. Back at Gold Rush production headquarters, chaos turned into opportunity. Executives smelled ratings. Crews were rushed north. Drones filled the sky before snowfall even stopped. Rumors swirled. Mid-season storylines rewritten. Early footage leaked. Parker shouting at an inspector over roaring machinery, "This isn't Beets' land anymore." The inspector's expression said everything. This wasn't reality TV drama. This was industrial warfare, fought under floodlights and frost. Just when it looked like Parker had locked everything down, the narrative twisted again. An anonymous former Beets employee leaked photos to local media. Rusted barrels stacked in a half-buried pit. Red stenciled warnings visible on every drum. Activists demanded charges. Commentators claimed the shutdown was justified all along. Tony, furious and cornered, called into a local radio station. "Those barrels aren't mine," he insisted. "They were there before I ever touched that ground. Someone's setting me up." But the optics were brutal. Fresh tire tracks led from the barrels to a Beets transport yard. Fuel receipts matched shipment dates. The story snowballed fast. Officials offered carefully worded non-answers. Parker's camp said nothing at all. Behind the scenes, Parker's lawyers pushed hard to make the ban permanent. "If that claim stays frozen," one insider whispered, "everything around it becomes ours." And then, just as investigators launched satellite scans to confirm contamination levels, they found something else entirely. What the scans exposed stunned everyone. Beneath the frozen, restricted claim lay a massive underground irregularity. Geological analysts, hired by the Territorial Office, quietly circulated early findings, data pointing to a pristine, alluvial deposit. Thick, expansive, and potentially worth tens of millions in premium-grade gold. The catch? The richest section sat directly under the land, now locked behind government seals. When word of the findings reached Parker's foreman, the response was immediate. New drill rigs appeared along the boundary within hours. If regulations barred them from breaking ground inside the restricted zone, they would bleed it dry from the edges. Hole after hole came back hot. Gravel threaded with fine flour gold, each core sample hinting at something colossal just beyond legal reach. From his remote cabin, Tony studied the incoming reports and finally understood the brilliance and cruelty of Parker's approach. The shutdown wasn't discipline, it was leverage. Parker had turned regulation into armor, keeping Tony locked out while systematically stripping the perimeter. Back at his abandoned camp, Tony leaned over aging maps, scarred with decades of handwritten notes. He traced the pattern forming on the reports. Parker's drill locations following the ancient river's curve, inching toward the exact zones where Tony had once uncovered his richest pace streaks. The realization landed hard. Parker hadn't just taken land, he'd taken the story, the crown, the idea that Beets ruled that valley. "He's not digging for gold," Tony muttered under the glow of a kerosene lamp. "He's digging for me." Night after night, Parker's operation burned under stadium-bright floodlights. Engines screamed against the cold, metal clanged like a ticking clock. Crews ran non-stop shifts, driven by one goal: reach the deep pay before the thaw, or before Tony struck back. Cameras caught their frost-covered silhouettes moving through clouds of steam. "No downtime," a foreman barked. "We're too close." Each bucket pulled from the claim's edge shaved another inch toward the buried vein beneath Beets's sealed ground. But the glow of progress brought shadows. Late-night reports started piling in. Sensors vanished. Survey stakes were ripped out. Hoses turned up, sliced clean through. Morning drone sweeps caught fleeting movement. Figures in dark parkas slipping back into the trees. Parker's comms team intercepted fragments of radio chatter, static heavy codes, and once a clear whisper, "They won't see it coming." Accusations flew in both directions. Fuel tanks mysteriously emptied. Loader parts went missing. A sudden rock slide blocked the haul road overnight. By midday, police lights flashed against snowbanks. Officials labeled it a territorial escalation. Everyone else knew the truth. This was a gold war. Warnings were issued, fingers were wagged. Nothing changed. Pride had taken over. So had the money. Law became background noise beneath roaring engines. Tony shifted tactics, not in the field, but in the courtroom. His attorneys filed an emergency injunction, demanding reinstatement of his mining rights. The suit accused the Territorial Office of illegal seizure and named Parker's shell company Klondike North Ventures as a willing partner in a coordinated removal. Parker's legal team fired back within hours, alleging defamation, obstruction, and sabotage. Just like that, the Yukon Supreme Court became the new front line. Outside, reporters flooded the steps, fans packed barricades, camera crews swarmed. Gold Rush producers leaned hard into the spectacle, teasing the trial of the Klondike across social media. Inside the courtroom, Tony sat rigid in a worn black jacket, staring across the aisle at Parker, who for once wasn't smiling. Testimony dragged on for days. Inspectors detailed violations. Mechanics described tampered equipment. Then came the bombshell. Leaked documents revealed overlapping board members between Parker's shell company and the environmental firm that initiated Tony's shutdown. The Yukon Mining Board announced a sweeping investigation into both camps, promising reform. Few believed it would stop there. Some insiders even whispered the unthinkable, a future alliance between the rivals.